Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the March 24th, 2022 regular board meeting of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. I'm functioning still with one eye, so I'll do my best to stumble my way through the chair's announcements, and please bear with me. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district, and today are located on the Tecumseh territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with the Tecumseh Secwepemc and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. I wish to welcome alternate director Andrea Inwards, attending for Director David Laird, alternate director Bill Sarai, who is attending for Director Dale Bass, and I don't see alternate director Dennis Walsh, although he's on my list. I see him neither on the screen nor in the room. However, we were expecting him. The TNRD library is. Oh, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, Lee Morris, who's attending on behalf of Director Rothenberger. That must have come at the last minute, alternate director Morris. It must have been rather sudden, was it? Okay. Sorry about that. The TNRD library is excited to announce its third residency in the fall of 2022. The Indigenous Storyteller in Residence will uplift Indigenous voices and perspectives and facilitate deeper cultural understanding by delivering programming across the regional district. Recruitment efforts are underway, and further details about this residence are in your folders. The TNRD Film Commission is pleased to advise the movie of the week, Single and Ready to Jingle, has wrapped up. Another movie is slated to start filming April 5th. An ATCO trailer commercial will be filming in the region for 2 days in early April. The Film Commission Hiring Committee is currently reviewing applications for the film commissioner position, and I expect that will be an extremely difficult pair of shoes to fill. The BC Film Commission's Creative Pathways is a motion picture workforce development initiative aimed at training and hiring workers for the film industry. Creative Pathways, the TNRD Film Commission and Thompson and Okanagan Work BC offices will be meeting to strategize development of a motion picture workforce. In terms of upcoming meetings and events, April the 6th to 8th is the LGL Leadership Forum. April 20th, we have Utilities Committee, Economic Development and Recreation Committee. On the 21st, Regional Solid Waste Management Committee, and a regular board meeting. Following that, on April 22nd, we will have a committee of the whole meeting. Today on your blue folders, you will find information related to item 5.4 on the agenda. Expression of interest for the Storyteller in Residence job posting, any mail that's personally addressed to you, and your LGLA folder. Are there any additions to or deletions from the agenda? Seeing none. We have minutes. Is there any errors or omissions in the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Delegations and invited presentations. We have Caribou Chilcotin Coast Tourism Marketing Association with Sydney Redpath, Director of Marketing, seeking a letter of support regarding a municipal and regional district tax renewal application to TNRD for the Area E Bonaparte Plateau. Is Mr. Redpath prepared to proceed?
I am here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed, we can. Thank you. I'm sorry. I thought it was Mr. Redpath. It's Ms. Redpath. Sorry.
Ms. Redpath, you got it. No worries. Thank you, Chair and Directors, for your time this afternoon. My name is Sydney Redpath, and I've been the Director of Marketing for Caribou Chilcotin Coast Tourism for the past 3 years. I'm not sharing my screen or doing a presentation for you today, but throughout my time, I will be giving an overview and context to, I believe, pages 23 to 30 of your package, which should be a pretty couple page brief on our process for MRDT renewal and then the request for a letter of support. So you're more than welcome to follow along on those pages. As you can see on your agenda, there is a request for a letter of support from our organization regarding our application for renewal of our regional, municipal, and regional district tax program, referred to as MRDT to save me all the words, which specifically for the TNRD concerns Area E, so the Bonaparte Plateau of the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. Although many of you are aware from your work within your own respective destinations, but for those of you that are not, MRDT is a 3% consumer tax applied to the sales of short-term fixed roof accommodations. These funds are reserved for the uses of tourism promotion under the provincial tax code. This process of renewal is required by the province of British Columbia every 5 years and involves obtaining support from our overnight accommodators and our respective municipalities and regional district bodies. That's my presentation to you today. Prior to the start of our regional MRDT program, there were very minimal dollars for tourism promotion for our smaller communities and rural areas, as compared to the majority of other destinations in British Columbia that had access to MRDT funding. We were at an extreme disadvantage when it came to creating awareness and thus favorability of tourism within the Caribou Chilcotin Coast. To give you a sense of what we were competing against, in 2019, over $74 million of MRDT were used to market other tourism destinations in British Columbia. Since May of 2018, when we began our regional program, we have leveraged about $2.5 million of MRDT dollars into almost $4.5 million of marketing programming to Caribou Chilcotin Coast tourism businesses. Some highlights of these efforts include garnering over 250 million impressions, over 105,000 direct referrals to tourism businesses, over 1 million website visits, over 1,500 television commercials placed, and joint campaigns with Cal Tire and the History Channel. And after the first year of the program, we had also achieved a 7% increase in overnight accommodation revenues, which exceeded our target of 5%. And then COVID came along and promptly reset all of that amazing first year progress. So it was an interesting year to start that program. But throughout COVID-19, these dollars have been especially important as the majority of our businesses saw their revenue and thus their marketing dollars disappear overnight. We have been able to keep marketing on behalf of our businesses and our communities, either driving visitation when it was permissible to do so, or inspiring consumers to think about their future travel needs. We have consulted, bringing us to today, we have consulted with and received the signatured support of the majority of accommodators within Area E of the TNRD, and thus respectfully request a letter of support from the regional district to our organization for our renewal application of this program. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have for the remainder of my time.
Thank you very much, Director Watson.
Thank you, Sydney. I do, and you and I have talked before about the challenge that we have in our area because we are supporting Gold Country communities as well as Caribou Chilcotin Coast, and what a difference those MRDT dollars would do for Gold Country as opposed to Caribou Chilcotin Coast. But as it has been pointed out, Gold Country isn't quite ready yet to be doing the MRDT. So I think we're going to have to go with Caribou Chilcotin Coast. So let's see if we can all work together on this.
Absolutely, Director Watson. And I understand your comments as the chair of that board as well. And correct me if that has changed since the last time we talked. But absolutely, more than happy to work together in spirit of supporting our industry and our tourism businesses for the next 5 years. to help them recover when they need it the most, for sure.
Thanks very much. Are there any further questions for Ms. Redpath? Seeing none, thank you very kindly for presenting to us today. We'll be dealing with that later in the agenda.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
That brings us to item 5.2, building infraction stop work order at 6058 Robbins Range Road, Samara Embry. Is there anyone here to make representations on that stop work order?
Not that we are aware of, Mr. Chair.
And you've received no correspondence?
We have not.
Thank you. Pardon? Director Quinn? Yeah. Then we have a further building infraction expired permit for 945 Green Lake Road. Leah Flather, is there anyone here to?
Not that we're aware of,
And no correspondence?
and no correspondence.
Thanks. Building in 5.4, building infraction stop work order, single family dwelling 529 Marshall Road, Marco Tozzini and Emilinia Loreto. I understand that they're going to address us. Are you present, Mr. Tozzini or Ms. Loreto?
Right. Yeah, we are here. Thank you very much for giving us this time. We appreciate that. So I'm Marco. This is my wife, Herminia. I have a quick presentation. I understand that we have some time restriction, but I still want to use that one as a base for our presentation. So let me know if you see my screen.
Yes, it looks like we're going to get it.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I just want to to share some of the information and the background that we have here. We've been kind of surprised when we've been issued this notice based on the conversation that we had 2 years ago. So anyways, so the background is that we had this, and sorry, before I move forward, can I assume that you have reviewed our documents here so I can go quick on some of the details?
Yes, your material was included in our agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll go quick. I'll stop only on the one that we think are more important to focus on. So this is a little bit of the background. We decided to buy a property. We understood that the property was kind of not in the best of the shape. We reached out. We did some investigation. We decided to move forward and work on the property for 2 years, and now we receive a stop work. So I just want to give you, an overview of what the property was. I think it was, really a biological hazard. It was very bad. We knew that there was a lot of work to do, and just not on the house, but around the house, there was different buildings, different structures that some of those are still there. Some have been removed and disposed. Just to give you an idea of what we found, right? The first item on the list was 3 fridges with rotten food that was there for 3 years. I don't know how long that was the situation there. So, again, some picture of the area. Everything was flooded. And this is the interior of the house. The house was, every room was full of material and items. I think the owner was a hoarder or something like that. Anyways, we look at the house. We understood the work, but we had to do some more work to restore the house. So our investigation reached out to to the major parties. So TNRD, we got confirmation that the house was not condemned and we could restore. With a restriction, we understood there was a riparian area, and the flooding was a limitation. Ministry of Transportation, there was a missing road that the Ministry of Transportation, they have rebuilt right now, and utilities that were not there anymore. And now we have water, hydro, and cable and gas at the property. So everybody has, just did what they kind of discussed and they promised to us. So the work that we have done, it was really, we really followed the instruction and the direction from the TNRD. I had a phone conversation and some email with the building department and the planning. And it was very clear to me that we could not, have new permit on the unit because it was close to the riparian area, close to the river, but the property was fixable, and I could not change the structure. That was the conversation that I had, and the example that was given to me was that the structure had to be the same. No extension, no second floor, changes to the structure. And I spoke with the building structure, with the building department, and I was told that I could replace everything that was damaged, and I would not need a permit for that. So that's what we did. So I'm going to go very quick on this one. There's the details of what we found. The building was done in 3 different probably time. There was an older structure and newer structure. And some of the concrete foundation, or pretty much, probably 50% of the house, they were already there. So we decided to work towards that one. What I'm trying to explain here in this details, right? It's really, and I'm gonna go quick. It's really that we did what we think and we believe it was a fix. We look at, parts of the house, and we isolated parts of the house, and we wanted to just replace what was broken, not usable, or damaged. And as you can see from this picture, that's exactly what we did, right? I didn't destroy the house. I didn't tear down the house. We worked, we leveled, we left the structure there. As you can see from the picture here, we also raised the house. We left the walls. And piece by piece, area by area, we just did what was required to be done. And it went from, leveling the structure to unfortunately have to clean and deal with the mold and animals that they were into the house. So this was done, piece after piece. Again, I'm going to go quick here to just explain how we isolated parts of the house. But I want to give you, to take this picture as an example, right? As you can see here, we work on that part of the house. So the section 1A, it's a part of the house where we have already created and raised and level the foundation, and there's still the old wood in the foundation here. And then when we look at the walls and we look at how the walls and the roof was there, we found that the walls were nice to see from the exterior, but when we opened the walls, there was mold from the flooding that has really contaminated the structure. And we couldn't really do anything other than replace wall by wall. And when we went to the roof, we found again that even there, it was a animal, there was some rats in the roof that have basically used the roof for so many years that the roof was totally contaminated as well. So again, this picture shows you that we focused on that area. We didn't touch the second section. Actually, the first area here is done. Section number 2, we start looking at section number 2. And as you can see, the wall has been moved and we raise, we work on leveling the foundation again, and then we move to the walls. And this is what happened, right? After moving section by section, we have replaced basically all the parts into that area because frankly, we couldn't live in that area, in that house. It was impossible. Every part was contaminated. But as you can see here, there's still the other part of the house that is not touched. So it's really moving slowly, right, to fix what was broken or damaged. So that was actually our idea. Oh, sorry. We didn't want to replace the rest of the house because it was supposed to be new and it was supposed to be okay. Unfortunately, even there, we found that everything was contaminated. And you see the mold here. What you see on the walls are also inside the walls, and the structure was impossible to be recovered. And so we have to replace even there, right? Walls and everything, the studs, because they were not possible. I have a picture of one of the little, well, I wouldn't say little, big rats, and I caught several of these, and they were living in the roof. They dig into the walls. So, they basically ruined everything and contaminated everything. There was dripping, on every joist that we couldn't reuse that. So anyways, we did the same. So section by section, unfortunately, that's what we had to do. I didn't want to do it, of course. I didn't want to pay the amount of money that I paid. But it's like when you start fixing a car, right? You start from something, you hope that your car is good, you feel your car is good, and then when you are at a point where you need to get going, you can't stop anymore. So, but again, to me, this is still replacing what was damaged. So, the other part, if I wanted to do something new, I think we are all in agreement that I would have done something to raise the house from the flooding plan. I would have, probably moved the building away from the mountain as well, but I knew that I couldn't do that. So I accepted that I didn't do that. And I left everything where it was. So, and all the work that we've done, it was way more expensive than building a new house for sure. So anyways, I think this is, again, is a fix. We maintain the structure, we maintain the layout, we maintain whatever wood we could leave for the foundation, and just replace what had to be replaced because we couldn't reuse. So this is what we believe. And we really believe that we've done what we've been told. Is that perfect? No, I understand it's not perfect. Unfortunately, it was way more expensive for us as well, right? We didn't want to get here, but it was inevitable. So if you add, a notice to the title, I understand from a very quick, investigation that I've done that I'm going to have problem. I'm going to be blocked to get financing. So because the amount of money that we have invested in the property with good faith, now we need more, right? And my budget, I know for sure that I need to work with a bank. So if I'm not able to work with a bank, this property is going to be stopped, right? I can't finish my work, and I'm not going to be able to finish the property. So I don't know what that means, but if this is the case, I may need to look if there's a little bit of disappointment to me is that I never really received a strong message when I investigated in the beginning from TNRD. And believe me, I received very strong messages from the Ministry of Transportation or from BC Hydro, where they were very clear and they were expecting that the property was actually condemned and we couldn't fix that one. So I had that messages, but I didn't receive that message from the TNRD. That's why we decided to move forward, right? Because we knew that that was going to be a risk. And because of the reassurance, I hope and I thought we could find a solution, and that we thought it was the solution. But now, we got stopped, and this is basically the decision to add a notice 57, and that will create that. So the other part that
I'll have to stop you there, Mr. Tazzini. You've run considerably over time.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. So I just want to stop on the last one, right? The last one is if you take this decision, it's going to be final, right? So we're going to leave this structure unfinished there, and there's another one there. So I don't think this is going to bring any benefit to anybody, but I'll leave this decision, of course, to you. And I think I'm done here. So thank you very much, anyways, for your for listening, for giving us this opportunity. We believe we are in good faith, and I hope you can take a decision not just for us but for the whole community. I mean, living a house that way, I don't think it's going to bring any value to anybody.
Thank you for your presentation.
And I apologize if I went a little bit longer.
That brings us now to unfinished business item number 6.1, building infraction 6058 Robbins Range Road. There is a recommendation.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, we need to deal with the letter of support first. It wasn't numbered under. We need to address the request for a letter of support from the Caribou-Chilcotin Coast Tourism Marketing Association.
Oh, I'm
first,
sorry.
please.
Thank you.
It wasn't on the agenda, but I'm pleased to move that a motion that TNRD support Caribou-Chilcotin on their request.
Thanks, Director Rain. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that's carried. Thank you. That, I think, brings us to 6.1, building infraction 6058 Robbins Range Road. There is a recommendation. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. 6.2, building infraction 945 Green Lake Road South. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. And that takes us to 529 Marshall Road. There is a recommendation. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Maybe we could get, excuse me, Mr. Chair. Could Regina have any explanation on that? It sounds like they've been misinformed for a long time to me, so I would like to hear your version of it.
Sure, if I may just
Ms.
briefly,
Sadilkova?
yeah, through the chair. I've spoken with the building inspector of the day and with in planning, Alex Kraus, who communicated on May 22nd, 2020 with Mr. Tazzini. That email is attached. That email was sent after their phone call, and it very clearly, because we find it's important to reiterate what we say on the phone in writing. It says very clearly that we could not issue a permit to authorize new construction at that location or reconstruction. So it's really, I feel very badly for them. I can't comment how they got carried away, but what has been built very clearly needs a building permit. One thing is the old house that flooded there that predated the TNRD, but we know it's in a floodplain and it has flooded more than once. And so now it is our responsibility under provincial legislation to do something. We can't unknow it. And not to say that the land can't be developed, as he said, he would have had to have a building permit. He would have to have, if he wanted to build even the same thing in the same place, rebuild it, reconstruct it, he would have required a floodplain exemption, probably a geotechnical hazard, and perhaps a riparian area, because it depends where the creek is. So going through all those steps, he might have opted to build elsewhere on the land or build higher, but as it's been completely or substantially rebuilt with roof structures, with foundations, we absolutely would need a permit but cannot issue it. So it's between a rock, between literally a creek and a mountain.
Thank you. Director Stamer,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the same question as Director Kershaw, and I'd just like a little bit more information on the timeline in as much as that, I'd like to know a little bit more on exactly what the TNRD did in those phases, Ms. Savilkova, in as much as that, where do we have that information in emails or in that, so that as that process was going forward, it was pretty clear to everyone involved that it was going to be extremely risky for this person to do what he attempted to do, because taking one look at what he was trying to do, I mean, I wouldn't even have attempted it. But anyways, I'd just like to know a little bit more clarity. You're mentioning an email back in May of 2020. What else did the DNRD do to reach out to this property owner?
So,
more history, Ms. Sadilkova.
yeah, really, the history is rather brief. In May 22nd of 2020, and that email correspondence has been attached at the very end. It is between Mr. Tazzini and Alex Kraus of our office. All of that is in there, and it's correct. He was advised that it's in the floodplain. He proceeded then, perhaps, I believe we were quite clear in this, but in 2020, in the summer, to then purchase the property. He also spoke with the building inspector of the day, who advised him. He has since retired, but we have spoken to him, and he advised him and warned him of the requirements and the difficulty to rebuild as it is there or reconstruct. The building inspector followed up in January of 2021 and went to the site. There was nobody on the site, but there was no active construction, so did not stop work, order it, took some photos. And then we were completely unaware that anything had happened until we were out in November doing rapid assessments. The building inspection staff was doing rapid assessments along the Coldwater-Nicola River. And then they came across the construction site and the photos you see in your report.
Is there any further discussion with respect to the recommendation? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Director Crow, Director Watson, Director Elliott, Director Sarai, Director Graham, Director Rain, Director Kershaw, Director Talarico, Director Singh, and Director Walsh. Sorry, yeah.
Are you asking who's in favor, Chair Gillis?
I'm sorry?
Are you asking who's in favor right now?
No, who's opposed?
Okay, sorry, I'm in favor. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. Director Singh is off the list. Ms. Sat, have you a tally? Thank you.
I have Director Crow, Watson. Can't read my own writing here. Graham, Rain, Kershaw, Talarico, and Walsh, Sarai. Have I got it? And Elliott. Is that all of those? And Rice. Thank you. Opposed. So that's 1, 2, 10 opposed. 10
Sorry, how many?
opposed. 10 opposed.
So the recommendation passes then, is carried. Director Stamer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a question to Ms. Savilkova, going forward, do we have a policy in place that when this type of a situation comes up, we get a confirmation from the property owner in regards to the explanation of what we are doing? In other words, in this situation, it seems perfectly clear that there was going to be some significant hurdles for this property owner to overcome. What do we do to make sure that that property owner not only is advised, but we get the feedback in as much as that they acknowledge that? What do we have to make sure that they actually understand what we're talking about?
Reading
You
the
understand what I
email-
mean on that,
Yeah,
right?
I do
Just
understand.
to make sure that we
Yeah.
don't have the same.
I think
sit-
at some point, First off, it all according to, perhaps they purchased a property in 2020. And I have no doubt they've invested a great deal of sweat and money into it. But now we know it's in a floodplain, and we've just been to court on a similar one where we put a notice on title. My job is to protect the organization. We put it in writing after a phone call. We were proactive. We followed up with the site visits within approximately 6 months after that. We do not have the staffing to sort of, how would I put it, to do more than that. So for us to pursue someone who may be confused about something we've told them, I think it's a very good practice, and we don't always have the time, our staff don't always have the time to re-reply to a phone call and put it all in writing. We've learned that we need to do that in case, just to protect the organization. I am not recommending legal action. We will defend this, and I believe I have the records to very successfully defend this if the owner launches legal action, because we have all that paperwork. And I mean, you can read the emails that we sent. I think they're not long, but they're thorough.
If I may, and I don't want to, we got enough of a meeting. I don't want to go off track here. I'm just saying, what I'm thinking of is there could be other properties affected from the flooding that might be in the same type of a category. And I want to know what safeguards are placed, whether on the existing property owners or somebody else that comes along and there's a red tag on that property saying, hey, you can't build on that property.
Yep.
Is there a mechanism to be able to do that so that people do not listen or hear some other advice and then find themselves in a situation? So is there a way of us being able to do that? Should we have another meeting to discuss that? I'm just wondering
So
if that's something that we should be aware of.
we have a system in place when we have geotechnical assessments after flooding or landslides. We have a land database where we add that. If we do not know about somebody building in a hazard, then we may take no action because we don't know about it. So then it's not a liability. If we should have known about it, or if we were made aware of it and we did nothing, that's a different situation.
Director Singh.
Mr. Gill, I just want to say quickly that I really do think staff did very good work here in due diligence. I respect Dr. Stammer's comments, but as vast as the district is, you can't please everybody. There's a significant responsibility on the ownership side here. These people, I feel very bad for them as well, but they seem to have run into some issues that they didn't foresee happening with the mold and the rats and whatever that have caused them to basically contravene what we initially told them. And I feel very strongly that the staff did a very, very good job here. And I feel bad again for Mr. Zini and his wife and the situation, but they've taken a significant risk, I think, knowing that was going to be happening. Even when they first bought it with a hoarding house and a flood and all these things, as Dr. Stammer said, I would never touch that myself, and with a 10-foot pole. So good on them, but they've run into a situation that's really, I think, one that they run into, not because of any the real district staff have done.
Thank you, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regina, is a 57. I was under the impression that section 57 was to take away the risk factor for the TNRD, but also so that the people who own the property can't sell it without that being,
Yeah.
So what I'm saying here is that right?
So there's two levels under board policy. One is a notice on title for minor infractions, and then going to court to order removal for major. Property absolutely can convey with a notice on title. It just alerts people to do their due diligence. It would alert a subsequent owner, well, presumably the current owner is now aware that they are in the floodplain, that this was all rebuilt, because it'll look like new construction. If you buy an old moldy shack in the floodplain, you're kind of warned, especially as you saw in the photos, the flooding line was halfway up the wall of the house. There was a line across the living room wall there, or some wall. I don't know what room it was in. So, but now it looks like a new building. So now any subsequent owner with the notice on title will be, it's buyer beware. It's the mechanism for that. Again, it can convey, it can affect financing for certain lenders. Some lenders will lend on section 57, some won't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Rain.
Sorry to drag this on, but just a question to the planning department. What happens if these people occupy the unit at this point?
So again, the notice, the community charter notice on title is there to indemnify us. It also advises that it was built without a permit, the construction. So the roof structure or what have you, it protects us if anything goes wrong, or if there isn't a smoke detector. We've never issued an occupancy permit for it. We've never issued a building permit for it in the floodplain.
My question more in the direction. If they occupied the unit, would we take then some action against them? Or our only action is we're putting section 57 notice on title?
So no, we would not at this point. If the creek rose and there was an imminent hazard, then we would post a do not occupy, potentially that's why our building inspectors were out doing assessments. They do that after wildfires or after floods. At this point, because you can only put one notice, if they were to continue to build more and bigger, then I would bring it back to the board for further enforcement at that point.
Thanks, Ms. Sadilkova. Director Rice.
Yeah, I guess I just extended the conversation. I didn't always last. No, it just raises, thank you, Chair. It raises a couple of questions for me, because moving forward with what's happened on the Nicola River, now, I wasn't on a floodplain. I very well might be after the spring freshet because of where the water sits right now. I was just out there yesterday looking again. The water's coming up already to my pump house. Wouldn't even be close to my pump house. So when a river moves significantly like that, they're also digging an 80-foot channel right 1,000 meters upstream towards Merritt, 30 feet wide, 80 feet deep, 2,500 feet long, to re-divert the river back over to Kettle Valley side, because right now it's where the road used to be. And they've actually completed about 80% of that process, and to see it unfold is really interesting. But my issue is moving forward, we have to be sort of aware that since this river has changed so much, and Gishon Creek also, by the way, which my dad lived on, changed significantly. He had creekfront property, and after that flooding, he had no creekfront property. It moved significantly to the east. So my question is, we're gonna have to look at this, I think, moving forward with this disaster and possibly subsequent disasters, because I actually may end up being on the floodplain at this point. So I'm not sure, if there's a question there, but it's a concern.
Yeah. So if I may, we've been looking at some properties that were built lawfully. They were built out of the floodplain, and now they are in the floodplain. We're taking no action there.
Okay.
But if they were to rebuild, or
Okay.
there are rules, and the province sets rules for how much you can add on. And I believe it's a one-time 25% addition, but please, I'm going by memory.
No, it's okay.
So there's strict rules that are given to us by the province of what you can rebuild or add on to that is non-conforming. And so these folks that are now in the floodplain of the Nicola River,
Right,
they can't add on to their house
Okay.
while the river's where it is.
right.
It's the same on lakes where there's accretion and erosion. Nobody makes you, move your house back up the bank.
Right.
But now you are in the floodplain potentially of a lake where there's accretion. You can ask for that land to be rolled into your property. That's handled by the Surveyor General right through by the province.
Okay.
We're not involved in that.
Okay. Thanks, Gina.
Thanks, Ms. Sadilkova. I'm just wondering, we are well aware now of this situation on Marshall Road. Should we take no action whatsoever, would that not leave us open to liability should somebody come along and buy that piece of property and then subsequently suffer a loss? And then they could they not come then to the regional district and say, well, you guys knew about it and you did nothing?
So about a month ago, we adopted a slightly revised board policy on section 57s. That was reviewed by our insurers, Municipal Insurance Association, and that it was on their advice. So I would say, based on they're the experts, not me, that we should be indemnified because we've taken the appropriate steps.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion with respect to the recommendation? Pardon? We're moving on. That takes us to zoning amendment application BA 226. There are two recommendations. Moved and seconded by Director Polderman. Is there any discussion on the recommendation one? Seeing none, all in favor? Is anyone opposed? No one's opposed. Recommendation number two.
Second, number two.
I should have stated that was carried. Number one was carried. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on number two? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Zoning amendment bylaw BA 228. There are two recommendations. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Has anyone opposed? Carried.
Move to.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Monty Creek Fire Protection Service Area Establishment and Loan Authorization Bylaws. We have a report from the Deputy General Manager of Operations and a series of recommendations for them. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Number one is carried. Recommendation number two. Is it seconded? Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Is anyone opposed? No one's opposed. That's carried. Recommend. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Move for.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? I'm sorry, I didn't ask for discussion. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Number four is carried. Thank you. They have the 5-year financial plan and a report for our Chief Financial Officer. Are you going to address this question? I assume you're addressing this question, Mr. Ray.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Very much, Chair, Board. Again, some highlights on the 5-year financial plan to augment the detailed report you have in your package. So very quickly, some background. The Local Government Act requires the TNRD to adopt a financial plan no later than March 31st of each year. And we do this by adopting our provisional plan, usually late in the preceding year, and then bringing forward a final plan.
Excuse me, Mr. Ray. Director Rice, could you turn your mic off, please? Thank you.
Thank you. And so then the final plan with the new assessment data and all the final things come forward now. So this really builds off that provisional plan. It takes in any program changes, capital items, personnel changes approved by the board since the provisional budget, as well as any other changes in estimate. with the new BC assessment data that we have in the new year, we were able to factor in new growth taxation, general assessment changes, and service level changes. And then we look at the overall global tax position and think about the impact on our operating reserves. So, excuse me. So the assessment base for this budget is the 2022 assessment on the completed roll that the BC assessment releases in January. Any minute now, I'm expecting the revised roll to be released, which will include the information from the appeals process that's been taking place in the interim. But at this point, the completed roll is the data I'm presenting today. The revised roll, which again may have some changes based on the appeals, is what we actually use when we're putting out the tax requisitions early next month. And so each year, the assessment values alter the allocation of taxes to each of the various municipalities and electoral areas, as well as how much of that tax is collected from each of the various 9 property classes. The real difference this year is simply that it's more pronounced. So looking at the budgeted expenditures, overall expenditures this year, 74.9 million versus 72.3 last year. It's an increase of 2 million, 2.5 million, or about 3.5%. The graph gives you kind of the high level picture of where those expenditures are distributed in the different service areas. And the budget itself attached to the report, you've got the detailed breakdown service by service. But you can see like the biggest chunk is that light blue area on the right. That is recreation and culture. So that primarily consists of the public library budget, but it also includes the community parks, community halls, the electoral area recreation funds for grants and aid, things of that nature. The yellow is the next biggest block, is the environmental health services. So that's primarily solid waste management, but it also takes in the invasive plants, mosquito control, curbside collection in certain areas. Protective services, a bit larger than it used to be, the orange block. That has all of our fire departments, which have a number of capital projects included in that this year, as well as the emergency preparedness service, which their budget's been expanded this year, as I'll get into a little bit more detail, with the idea being it's more of a contingency, where when we run an EOC, we get refunded money from EMBC, but the EOC events have been large enough in recent years that I felt that the amount allowed for in the budget wasn't really adequate. So it's not necessarily driving additional taxes, but it's allowing for those contingencies. The purple on the right-hand side is the utilities, and general government on the left. So if I break the expenditures down between sort of our ongoing operational costs, capital projects, and what I've been calling extraordinary, things that aren't really capital, but they are still sort of one-time exceptional things. The extraordinary, for the most part, the last couple of years has consisted of the money we received, the COVID-19 Safe Restart grant funding that we built into our budget as it's being spent. So it's funded through that grant. Capital has remained fairly consistent. Some projects are wound up, other projects are being added. The extraordinary is down about 647,000 compared to last year. That's mainly changes in the transfers to reserve, as well as having less of that COVID-19 money left to rebudget for and spend this year. The majority of the changes in the operating budget. And so where those changes really come in, again, as I was saying, the EOC in the emergency preparedness budget, we were typically historically allowing for about $500,000 to be spent per year in those emergency response situations that would be covered by the monies we would be recouping from the province. Last summer, we spent about 10 times that. So I was looking at it from a authority point of view, where realistically, where we get authorization to spend that money is from this budget. So we wanted to allow for a larger event before we would have to come back to the board and ask for an amendment to the budget to authorize that spending, knowing that we're really working under the approval of EMBC and being guaranteed to receive those funds back. Likewise, with the volunteer fire departments, they've been in the situation where when they're deployed for events and they receive funding in return from the province, there's nothing really in the budget to allow for that revenue and the related expenses. And when they're deployed, they're required to pay indemnities to the volunteer firefighters, and they incur other costs. And coming back to the board for an amendment to the budget isn't necessarily a timely enough thing. So we've allowed for a bit of a contingency in there that we didn't have before, of basically money that they would be authorized to spend in the event that they're getting the money from the province and not otherwise, as well as some training to be done on a cost recovery basis. So it increases the budget, but it's not necessarily increasing the taxation. And likewise, on the capital side, there's new fire hall addition capital project for a fire hall addition and truck at McClure. So there's $700,000 added to the capital budget this year using gas tax funds. I think that comes up later in the agenda for approval. So what is going to be driving that increase in taxation that we'll see a little later are costs that are covered by taxation, namely 4 new staff positions that the board approved last year, but it wasn't built into the 2021 budget. So now it's hitting the budget in 2022. So that's just under $400,000 of the $770,000 tax increase. There's also the normal lift in pay that the collective agreements for their unionized staff call for and exempt staff receive. Payroll being about 40% of the operating costs of the organization. And there's some other expansion of invasive plant service. If you recall that we expanded the service to take in some of the member municipalities. And at the time, there was an additional $50,000 of tax being a part of that service expansion. I couldn't quite fit it on the page, but I know that there's a contract change coming for the Area J curbside collection that anticipates increase in taxation for that service. So it's other than these things, it's mainly small changes in a wide variety of services. The other thing that's affecting the income tax, or not income, property tax situation this year. Last year in 2021, with us being in the middle of the pandemic, we made the choice to do a one-time draw on the solid waste management reserve funds, about $250,000, to reduce taxation on a sort of one-time basis and provide some tax relief. So this budget doesn't do the same thing. It's more normalizing the tax, which would have been there in 2020, taken away in 2021, and now it's going back. So what else is new? There's no newly established services that go into the 2022 budget. There'll be a new Money Creek Fire Department for next year, 2023 budget. We have a number of ongoing capital projects included in this budget. There's continued construction of a new eco depot for Ashcroft and Cache Creek currently. We still have grant funding for water treatment plant construction in Pritchard. Black Pines water system improvements funded through grant primarily. There's some debt involved there as well that was approved with the referendum. Completion of the water meter installations and all TNRD water service connections, that's mostly wrapped up. There's construction of the new fire hall in Loon Lake, as well as one plan for Tobiano. Grant funded additions to fire halls in Bayview and Blackpool that began last year. Still most of the cost to be completed this year, as well as the project in McClure that was mentioned, $700,000 for addition and new truck. There's reserve funds allowed for in the library system to continue looking at land acquisition and initial planning costs for new Southwest Library branch, as well as added this year at about $1 million was allowing for rebuild of the library and village administrative office in Lytton, anticipating roughly that much in insurance proceeds. None of that has begun, but it's been allowed for in the budget using the insurance proceeds to offset the cost. Capital developments at Smith Pioneer Community Park using gas tax or Canada Community Building Funds. Renovations here at the Civic Building for additional office space and more efficient use of the space and create a dedicated EOC center, mostly using the COVID-19 grant funds as well as money from our reserves. Some upgrades to the Mission Flats building as well. So that's a fairly comprehensive list of the major capital projects. How does it affect our operating reserves? Well, so you can see what we have in the bank at the end of 2021. General administration, there's about 1.8 million. There's about 2.2 million at the beginning of 2020. This budget calls for pulling just under $1 million out to offset some of the costs we've been incurring last year and this year. That'll leave just over 800,000 left. The budget assumes that the money in the COVID-19 Safe Restart funding all gets used this year. We're pulling $1 million out of the solid waste management reserve. There's a 10-year financial projection we use for solid waste management plan that anticipates drawing that number down to about 5 million at the end of 10 years in order to maintain a lower level of taxation than otherwise. Library, we intend to use all of the reserves towards that work I just mentioned for the Southwest Management or Southwest Area Library, as well as there's money that's been dedicated in there for some work in Sun Peaks. Very little left in the operating budget for E911, although we have a capital reserve separate from this that will help address the next generation technology costs that are coming. Building department, we're putting some money in there. They have been working at a very high volume, and we've been exceeding our budget projections for a number of years now in the permit revenues that we're bringing in. And so the idea with that is to balance out their taxation so that it remains relatively the same as it did in 2021, which was significantly lower than it was in 2020. Put the money aside in the reserves, and then when the volume of activity slows down and those permit revenues drop off, we draw some of the money out of this reserve to again keep the volatility out of the taxation there. And then there's 150,000 coming out of the Area E Community Assistance Fund that was previously approved to go towards the Loon Lake Fire Hall construction. So all in all, if everything went according to plan, that's fully 30% of the reserves expected to be used this year. Property tax requisition has been in a downward trend for the last number of years, and it's starting to reverse. That was mainly achieved through some cost savings, which were expected to be ongoing, and that's why we allowed the taxation to decrease rather than just putting the money aside in reserves. But now we're starting to play catch up with some of these costs, such as new staff, office renovations, and so forth. It's projected to be slightly higher than it was in 2020, still less than it was in 2018. And the number of services over that time have stayed pretty consistent, although we took on 5 more fire departments in 2019. The breakdown between municipalities and electoral areas you see there of the $770,000 tax increase compared to 2021, roughly 426,000 is municipal taxes, and the rest from electoral areas and local services. Now, that's about a 3.4% increase in the total tax requisition. As I said, there was a drop in 2021 due to COVID, we were trying to provide some tax relief. So if I use my handy dandy time machine and compare it to 2020, it's actually only a 1.6% increase over the 2020 tax requisition over the 2-year period, about $377,000. Most of that's still in the member municipality side, very little change when I compare it to 2020 for the electoral areas and local services. So what are those assessment changes? Similar to what I showed you at the hospital district board this morning, we've got a almost $7.3 billion increase in assessment values, little over 25%. Everything going up 25% all in 1 year. Of that, there's a little over 700 million that's non-market or new construction change, 2.46% compared to last year. 22.87% of it is all market change. And overall, 82% of the non-market change is in class 1 residential, and 93% of the market increase is class 1 as well. So that's where all the growth is. So typically what we do is we do a calculation. We say, well, what if we applied the same tax rates that we had in 2021 and applied it to this extra assessment value in the market? If we did that, we would end up essentially having $659,000 more tax this year than last year. Comparatively, new growth in 2021 was less than half of that, 272,000. So theoretically, that 659 should offset most of the $755,000 increase in the tax requisition this year. However, the rest of the assessment changes impact residential taxpayers slightly differently. So, but this is the breakdown of where that new growth in assessment and taxes is. So looking at the various member municipalities, there's a little bit of negative growth in Clinton. That was mostly in class 4, which is a major industry. Lytton, clearly, they took the wildfires into account in this year's assessment. The majority of the growth in assessment was in Kamloops, where most of the majority of the population is. Sun Peaks was still considerable. Merritt is now Merritt, of course, they haven't necessarily reflected any impact from the flooding because it happened so late in the year. And that may well be still reflected in the revised roll. So when the revised roll numbers are taken into account, we'll recast these numbers, and that's what's going to drive the tax requisition. So be warned, these numbers are likely to change. It's just a question of how much. In the electoral areas, negative growth in area I, and that's actually in multiple different classes, class 1, 4, 6, 8, 9. That's likely a result of the fires as well. There's some growth in area A and B in class 2, which is utilities, which would look to be Trans Mountain Pipeline is my guess, that they're starting to take some of that construction into account with the assessment base. I expect most of that assessment comes into play once the pipeline actually goes into production. There's been some growth in area J, mostly Tobiano, in area P, are the most significant areas. So most of the new growth taxes would lie in the electoral areas. And I know I've been having discussions with the board leading up to this on this subject, so I'm not going to linger over this quite a lot, but how does the changes in assessment really impact the taxes? Well, we set the budgets, which tell us how much tax is required to effectively fund the services we provide. And then the cost sharing formula is based on converted assessment. So it becomes a mathematical exercise at that point. Each year, I always tend to think of it as like a series of bubbles. Some bubbles grow a little bit and some shrink. There's the same amount of space inside those bubbles, but some are expanding and some are decreasing relative to each other. And that adjusts which of the municipalities and electoral areas are providing the taxation. And then likewise, once you get to each area, how much we're collecting from each property class is again dependent on the converted assessment within that area. So as we've talked about before, there's been a growth in the class 1 residential and not so much decrease in the other classes. It's just not growing as fast as class 1. So going back to 2015, class 1 would have been paying about 61% of the taxes on average. This is for the TNRD as a whole. And of course, what we're really doing is taxing for each of 124 services individually. So it's not necessarily actually TNRD as a whole. But on average, this is holding true where, 61% in 2015, and now we're up to about 70%. So it's moving more of the tax burden to the residential homeowners. This is the shifting in the proportionate converted assessment for each of the municipalities. So I haven't put in the change year to year, but you can see for services that everyone's paying into, if you look at the proportionate share each area has as their converted assessment represents, some go up, some go down, it still adds up to 100%. So these are all percentages. So, Kamloops changed slightly, went up a little bit, Barrier went up a little bit from 0.83% to 0.88%. The ones I've highlighted in red are the ones that are actually decreased. So Logan Lake went from 2.1% of the total down to 1.94, or 5.91 down to 5.48 if you're looking at the group without Kamloops involved. Sun Peaks had a little bit of an increase. So Clinton and Lytton and Logan Lake are really the ones that saw decreases relative to the rest, and everyone else is seeing a little bit of an increase. Overall, the municipalities, in terms of the municipal share of the converted assessment, went from 78.66% of 100 to 78.94. So there's a little bit more of the tax burden on the municipalities than on the electoral areas. And in the electoral areas, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Area B, E, I, J generally decreases in their relative share, as well as area N. Area P saw a bit of a bigger increase than some others. So what does this all really mean? Well, what it means is that if we're collecting a certain amount of tax, how much are we getting from each municipality, each electoral area shifted slightly based on those different cost share formulas. And then from there, when you look in to each individual area, how much of the tax are we collecting from the residential sector? Generally, that's where the growth has been. So again, down the left-hand side, I've got the municipalities, down the right-hand side, the electoral areas. Ashcroft actually saw a slight decrease in the share of their converted assessment that is class 1, from 72.66% of their total to 70.81. Lytton also a decrease, and area P actually stayed fairly stable, but a small decrease. Everyone else has some fairly significant increases. Clinton went from residential being 60.57% of their converted assessment to 68. That's a large increase. And it's just with that growth in the value that BC Assessment came back with for residential housing. So what that says is that if we're collecting tax from each area, the residential taxpayers are going to be paying more of it. And here's a good illustrative example. So I looked at area N. Area N, in terms of the general proportionate share for everyone, went from 1.96% to 1.86. So a smaller cost share in the larger services. And indeed, when I compare the actual taxation dollars we're collecting from area N year to year, it's decreased by almost $12,000, from $995,000 in 2021 to $983 this year. But the residential share of those taxes has increased by 5.86 percentage points, from 28.18% to 34.04%. So residential properties are paying a bigger share. So if you take the 983,000 this year, multiplied by 34%, Residential is paying 334,000 versus 280 last year. So even though it was a $12,000 decrease in the tax dollars we're getting from area N, residential taxpayers are paying more, almost a $54,000 increase. There's a little bit of new growth there. If you look at the number of properties, according to BC assessment, we've got 553 versus 548. But if you divide the residential share of the taxes by the number of properties, it comes out to, the average valued property this year would be paying $605 versus $512 last year. That's almost a $94 increase. And, it's all being driven by those changes in assessment. So the average residential house prices for municipalities, and again, I'll send out all of these slides to all the directors to refer to later. Because I know it's hard to take all this information in a short presentation. This is basically taking the gross class 1 residential assessment as per BC assessment and dividing by the number of properties to come up with an average value. The changes are fairly significant. Lytton, of course, has decreased due to their terrible situation. But if you look elsewhere, Clinton, I think, has the lowest increase at just under 20% value. The largest one, I think, is in Logan Lake at almost 38%. And somewhat of what we'll see when it comes to taxes is migrating taxes from area to area. If an area like Lytton has had a significant impact to their valuation, then those taxes are being picked up by the other areas.
Mr. Chair, can I have an opportunity just to stop right there for a sec?
Okay.
Sorry, but I was going to ask this question later, but I thought it was more important with this slide. So Doug, thank you for that. Can you explain to me then, when we're looking at saying that, county increase 556, 1041 and 41.6, when you look at the increase of the prices, it counts 25% and Clearwater was 35%. Why is it such a dramatic shift in that amount?
So we can't hear Dr. Stamer on Zoom.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I just asked a question that if there's a 25% increase in the residential assessment in Kamloops and theirs goes up 556 and there's a 35.6% increase in Clearwater and it goes up $41. I just wanted clarification on that, what was in our minutes. So I'm sure the director from Clearwater would like to know the same.
So if I go back a couple of slides, so Kamloops' share of our overall services that everyone participates in, such as public library, film commission, general administration, went from 64.45% to 64.52. That's based on not just the change in its own converted assessment, but relative to the changes in everyone else's converted assessment. So that would mean that if taxes had stayed the same as last year, there'd be a little bit more collected from Kamloops. And then if I go here, so their residential share of those taxes goes from 70.56% to 72.71. So not only are we collecting a little bit more money from Kamloops, but we're collecting more of it from the residential homeowners. So when I get to here, this is simply the change in the average valuation. So the average valuation's gone up for Kamloops by about just under 25%. So there's going to be some new growth mixed in there because some of that increase in valuation isn't necessarily existing properties. Some of it is going to be new growth, but the vast majority of it is an increase in market value in class 1. So you've got a bit of a double or triple whammy there on the residential taxpayers because, in Kamloops, as an example, they're attracting a little bit more of the existing tax to Kamloops, a bit more of that tax burden by that particular set of taxpayers. And it's not all being offset by having more taxpayers. So this is the change in the average residential price, just again, taking the gross valuation and divide by the number of properties. And that's not necessarily the percentage change in tax. That's just the change in the valuation. So then we get to the change in the tax requisitions. There is some increase in the tax requisition this year compared to 2021. So again, you can see the changes. Those are the tax rates that would derive when we look at how much tax do we need to get from residential taxpayers in each area to get that their share of that tax requisition. Those are the rates. And then based on those average valued properties, this is the taxation that they'd pay in 2021 versus 2022 versus 2021. So in Kamloops, it's a $5.56 increase that the average valued residential property would pay this year compared to last year. Now, over in that green column, what I did is I said, what would this look like if I took the exact same budget, not a single change to the budget, but applied the 2021 assessment values? So you remove any of the new growth, but you also remove any of that shift from last year to this year for residential taxpayers, and you remove the shift between Kamloops or Barrier or other areas. If the assessment had stayed absolutely static, and it would have been a $3.17 increase based on the change in the tax requisition. The other $2.38 is completely a result of those assessment changes. Now in Kamloops, that doesn't make a big difference, but if you look at, and it's actually, I think, funny, it's not showing Sun Peaks because it's looking larger on this screen than it did on my screen. If you look at Clinton, for instance, if I applied the 2021 assessment, it would have been a $12.24 increase. The change in assessment actually acted to decrease that to a $10.41 increase. But the green is what the increase would have been had there been no change in assessment. And the right-hand column is the difference between that and what you actually get when you apply the 2022 assessment figures. And looking at the, with this one, I thought it would be interesting to compare it. I've done this the last couple of years to compare it back to what the average taxes were in 2010. So same information in the 2022 column, 2021 column, the 2010 column, same calculation. What's the gross residential assessment divided by the number of properties, and apply the tax rate to get the correct amount of tax from the residential taxpayers. Kamloops, it's slightly higher than it was in 2010, but all those ones with red dots are currently paying less, according to this calculation, than they were in 2010. If you look at Barrier, the calculation this year, tax of $263.40, up $29 from 2021. It's still lower than the 281.76 tax calculated in 2010. So all of the ones with the red dots are actually lower today than they would have been in 2010, 12 years ago. Because our taxes were higher in 2010 than they are today. Sun Peaks is paying more than they were back then, as is Kamloops. In the electoral areas, there's the tax requisitions comparatively. Small increase. There's the tax rates. And same calculation, there's the average tax paid on the average valued residential property in each of the electoral areas compared to last year. The green bar is what it would have looked like had there been no change in assessment. And the bar at the right is the difference. So as I showed you earlier, area N is looking at almost a $94 increase. If I was still applying the exact same assessment from 2021, it would have been under $20. So $74 of that increase is the change in assessment. In some cases, well, what that's saying is that the residential value has grown significantly. And this whole system, it's not an income tax. It's not a tax on what cash you have in the bank. It's a tax on the potential value you have because you haven't sold the house. It's a potential value in that residential property. That's the way the system's designed. And the more value gets concentrated in those residential properties, the system's designed to take more of the tax from those properties. So area B and area E, well, area B is seeing a tax increase, or sorry, tax decrease in red there. It was actually in 2021 assessment values would have been an increase of $4.42. The change in assessment actually flipped that around to a $7 decrease. Area I would have been a slightly bigger decrease, and now it's a $6.82 decrease. But the other areas are generally seeing increases, and you know, quite a bit of it is driven by that increase in value in residential properties and the changes in assessment, which I don't control. Again, comparing it to 2010, 5 out of the 10 electoral areas, exact same calculation, just comparing it to the figures in 2010, half the electoral areas are paying less today than they were in 2010, more than in 2021, for the most part. The other half, obviously, paying more. So that's it. A lot of information, I know.
Are there questions for Mr. Ray? Oh, Director Singh.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. Listening to Mr. Ray always makes you wish I'd pay more attention in high school math, but I'm not sure that actually would be helpful anyways at this point. It's always such a, so a couple, I guess, one of the things with the massive increase in assessed values across the province last little while is people have been, you know, citizens have been asking about, you know, what that implication is for tax increases more than ever, in my view. And you know, what I've been kind of saying is if your, you know, if your assessment's kind of like in keeping with the average, then it'll only go up to 2-3% or whatever you're going to charge for the increase in taxes. But now we've added this added wrinkle in, which I think is very fair, Mr. Ray, around between classes. So it's also, it's within a class or within a neighborhood or within an area, but it's also between classes. Is that what I'm hearing?
For regional districts, yes, it works a little differently in municipalities. So the way I understand it is a municipality, and I know I'm oversimplifying, but my understanding is the municipalities have the ability to kind of keep that proportionality the same. So they can work with the tax rates if they, and I'm making numbers up because I don't know what they are. If you had a municipality that said, we're going to collect 60% of our property taxes from the residential sector and 40% from business and other classes, then if all the value of the residential alone went up through the roof, you could still manipulate it to say it's still going to be a 60-40 split. So from a residential point of view, if all the residential properties increased in value, if you follow me, it shouldn't vastly impact the taxes that they're paying because they're still collecting 60% of the taxes from that sector. So it's only really going to change if your particular property went up, you know, as you said, different from the average in residential. But the same doesn't apply to regional districts. We don't have that flexibility. So the way the system's built, it's first based on those converted assessments. If, and in this year, overall in the TNRD, class 1 went from representing 67% of the total converted assessment to 70% of the total, which means if we were collecting the exact same amount of tax, it's forcing more of that tax to come from the residential sector. So it's not just whether your residential property's gone up more than average or less than average from the other residential properties. It's being affected by the fact that the whole residential sector increased in value.
So the other thing I was kind of wondering about was just, I mean, really, this whole line of questioning is how do we explain it to people, right? How do we actually explain this to our constituents, you know, in River Shore or in, you know, in area A or wherever kind of a thing, right? And so when you add the hospital taxes on top of that, because obviously there's two streams of taxation we have, we talk here about just the TNRD tax, but the hospital taxes, you know, obviously seem to be, they're actually more, I think, than taxes coming out of the TNRD for hospital use. You know, so I guess the question is, Like, are we planning to sort of put a press release or a communication out to residents about this? And how do we keep the explanation as simple as possible while still doing justice to the complexity of what this all is about?
We are putting together a press release. I think it's planned to go out later today. And I do believe it's vitally important that we do more engagement with the public and have more direct conversations with the public. That's part of what, you know, the additional position in finance I'm hoping to achieve with that. It's not simple. Like, I wish I could just give you like an elevator speech of like, here's 5 words you can use to easily explain it. There's a lot of factors at play. And as you can see, I'm doing my best with illustrative examples to explain it to all of you and to anyone in the public listening in through the streaming of the meeting. But it's not easy. But I think where we can help is with some use of our communications department to put together some helpful infographics. Perhaps we want to put more stuff out on social media and try and inform people more about how this system works. But
Yeah, I'm sure BC Assessment would have some stuff too, but yeah, that's a big job for the communication folks. One last question is around, is it fair to say that essentially the loss of industry in the more rural areas of the region are responsible for, because obviously industry isn't growing, so the tax base isn't really available anymore. That's obviously driving the shift to residential as well, I imagine. Would that be correct to say?
I'm not sure I caught all of the question, but I think what you're saying is that there's been a lot of increase in market value versus new construction. There has been significant new construction. It just hasn't kept up with demand.
Well, I was asking about the actual loss of industrial operations in the industrial or heavier business tax classes.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but it seems, you know, to be less of a significant factor than just the market prices for residential. You know, we've had some mill closures over the last few years, and more as new businesses are coming in place to replace them. It's more and more online and stuff like that, less brick and mortar that generates those property taxes. But if you look at where it's not that we've had significant decreases in value in the industrial business assessment. It's grown as well, just to a much smaller extent than the residential values have. And that's part of what I tried to bring forward previously at the committee of the whole meeting. So some of the reasons for that, my understanding, you know, we've had an uptick of people in the Lower Mainland finding Kamloops to be a desirable place to move to. You know, their properties they're either unable to afford their properties in the Lower Mainland, or they've become so valuable that they're looking at it as time to realize the value in that property and move into the interior and buy a house or two and settle here. There's also, my understanding, a number of people retiring from the oil patch in Alberta. So the real estate agents I've spoken to say they're seeing an increase in people moving from Alberta here. There's a drive from new homeowners to get into the market. They see the prices rising, interest rates are set to rise, so they want to snatch up what they can now before it becomes more expensive. All of this is driving a bit of a frenzy to buy residential properties. There's money there to pay whatever price they want to set to get what they want. And there's the inventory just hasn't been keeping up.
Thank you, Director Wright.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this, and Jamie and I were talking about this today at lunch, and also I've talked to you a little bit about it, Doug, but as we know, the assessments for the flood victims has not been done yet. So that's sort of going to be reflected. And first question, real quick, have you got any indication, BC Assessment, when they will do that?
So with the floods that happened very late in the year, my understanding is it really didn't leave any time for BC Assessment to take it into account with the values they released in January, which is what everything I've shown you today was based on. I'll check my computer when I get back to my office, but the revised roll numbers may well be published by then, if not early next week.
Okay.
My understanding is what BC Assessment was asking people to do was take advantage of their appeals process that took place throughout February and early March. If they didn't feel that their property value is properly reflected in the January notification, bring in the evidence. There's been flood damage, there's been whatever. I think my property's overvalued, and they would take that into account in the revised roll.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure how much of that actually occurred. I don't know how much of it they said, well, we can only take so much into account this year. Some of it may be reflected when they do their work this year to set the 2023 valuation next year.
They extended the deadline for the floods, which was good, and
Yeah.
they gave a specific number to call, and staff was on it. Jamie and Colton got that information out when we sort of had a conversation about it. What worries me, really concerns me now is, and not just in my area, but certainly in throughout the regional district, these properties that are no longer properties that have been assessed, and the assessments jumped 25%. In the Spencer's Bridge area, I would suggest closer to 40%. And not only are they paying those taxes and their whatever and their mortgage when they don't have a place to live and rent at another place, but those assessments are not being used, those inflated assessments are not being used by the province to give them their disaster relief funding. Last year's assessments are. So the whole schmozzle, and I know you have no control over this, but BC Assessment and the province somehow has got to put their head together. Maybe staff can do something with this and we can form some kind of a communication, because it's a real concern. These are questions that probably haven't been asked of our province and to a lesser degree our federal government for a very long time, if ever, because of the extent, the magnitude of these disasters. But now they're being answers, and they simply don't have any answers. You know, so some dark holes for some people that are in a really dark place right now, and I think it needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Director Rain.
Yeah, thanks. You know, early on, you showed the draft, the requisitions are going down, we've got to bring them up. But what we didn't show is exactly this question that Arjun was, Director Singh was looking at. With this transformation of less industrial, more residential. In fact, the residential component's not descending like our requisitions, it's in fact going up. And when I looked at the calculation quickly, you had to do it fast one with your numbers there. I think 7.6, 7.7% increase in Sun Peaks is on the board. But I also looked at, I think, area N, and quickly I couldn't do the arithmetic in area N fast enough, but they got to be looking at 10% or more. So a whole bunch of property owners, in fact, should expect increases in taxes, quite a few, that are going to be well above 3%. In fact, on average, they're going to be much higher. And you also said, I can't do anything about all these assessments. That's absolutely true. But one thing that we can do as a board is we can look at how much money we're collecting. That's the important issue. This is not a bunch of hocus pocus and all these numbers. If we are going to, provide more services, everybody's taxes are going up. If we provide less, everybody's taxes could go down. The one I'd like to look in particular, a little explanation, because you did mention in library, we're going to use up all of the reserves. And I remember last year you mentioned that there was a reserve going ahead, was in place for Sun Peaks Library, but quite frankly, that's the school board told us we're in a rush position. We have so many, we have now, I think, 6 classrooms, in all in portables. But we're number 4 on the list. So within at least 10 years, they might look at a new school in Sun Peaks. I'm not quite sure. Everybody's in the same position, but the library, we'd like to make the library part of the school. So maybe Sun Peaks Library is 10 years down the road. So but last year you put some money aside, but this year I noticed all the reserves are being used up. Where is all the reserves being used up?
So the rest of the reserves for the library are committed in the budget for the plans for the Southwest Library. There would be allowing for potential land acquisition and initial planning before we would be in a position to apply for grants, before we'd be in a position to take any kind of request to the public to approve any kind of debt borrowing, both of which would be necessary to actually move that project forward.
Okay, so that's a couple of $1 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess next question I have is, I remember this came up about a year ago. I said, before we commit to a library, are we going to have a needs assessment? Are we going to talk to the taxpayers? Because one of the things that has struck me is that, and I go to all the library meetings at UBCM that they've had, and I noticed that the library people are all rushing to make sure that everybody realizes they're kind of not in the books business and the information business like they used to be because of the internet. And in fact, having social, you can learn to play guitar, you can do a whole bunch of other things. Libraries had to reinvent themselves because the number of people going to libraries to get information is declining like this, because you just go on your computer and you get it much faster and probably more up to date than you can get it in the library. But have we committed to Southwest Library? I mean, I don't think this board has committed. I asked, we're going to see a needs assessment. We're going to talk to the taxpayers. We're talking $4, $5, $6, $7 million easily. I don't think the board has ever made this decision yet where you can't control anything, but we're stuffing money aside for all these things that I don't think the board has approved yet. And that impacts how much taxes the ratepayers are going to pay. I mean, have we committed to a library? Southwest Library, this board committed to, I don't remember. I remember when it came up, I said, I want to see a needs. I said, so I want to make sure that this is wise spending of the taxpayers' money.
Well, I would say that, the money that's put into the budget out of that reserve, those are the kinds of things that's intended to fund.
But I think got the cart before the horse here. I mean, is it the finance department who is deciding when we're having libraries?
Well, no.
And where we're gonna have libraries, or is it this board's decision? And I just don't understand why board hasn't made a decision yet. We're putting the money aside so that we can make the decision in the future. So I'll all have it there. I mean, this is costing the taxpayers money. This is everybody's taxes is going up because we're already anticipating we're going to build a new library.
Thank you. Point, Director Rain. Mr. Hildebrand, do you wish to comment on that?
Thank you, Chair Gillis. The board did actually confirm us to go and explore options for land, and they were well aware of the money that was set aside for possible land acquisition. So that money was agreed to by the board. But the what is
For the purchase or in looking at?
Explore the option with the funds that were set aside.
That was my understanding, but
We can go
explore the
back.
option is one thing, but to say we're going to buy land is another thing. I'm sorry, somebody else.
Okay.
wanted to
Director
speak.
Watson?
Thank you. During that conversation, I recall asking if staff could look into removing Area E from the library service, because we are very, very poorly served by the library service. We get a bookmobile a couple of hours a month. And for us to build another library in Kamloops doesn't make sense to my taxpayers. Currently, more than half of my area pays into the Caribou-Chicoton Hospital District rather than the Thompson Regional Hospital District. And nearly half of my area pays school tax to the Caribou-Chilcotin School District. And so I would like the opportunity to find out if we can opt out of the Thompson Regional Library District as well.
If I may,
Director Rain?
if I may, Mr. Chair, I already looked at it. It's next to impossible, but you could do it, but it'd take you about 3 years, and you better know the Minister of Municipal Affairs very well.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, on a point of order, we're supposed to be talking budget, not about library services in Area E or wherever. Can we come back to the budget, please?
So is there any further question for Mr. Ray? I'm seeing no hands raised. There are 3 recommendations.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Director Rain, Director Watson. I see no others. Passes recommendation number 2.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any, excuse me, is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Director Rain and Director Watson, are there any others? I see no others. That's carried. Number 3.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on recommendation 3? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Director Rain, Director Watson. I see no others. That's carried. And I think this would be an appropriate time for us to take our afternoon break. So we'll reconvene at 3:30.
Yes.
Yeah. David told me. We're doing that.
Oh, the audit committee ones, yeah. Yeah, those are the ones I sent you. Are they? Which one? Oh, this is December 17th. No, okay. Can I read them?
Some of these are from 2020.
Yeah. I haven't signed any of the work. And then there's a couple of them camera minutes that I sent down here, but I don't know if I've ever seen them.
Okay, so the next meeting with Dan is away right now.
Okay.
And I'll mention it to
Yeah. Yeah. These ones I've seen before, but you can sign it. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Hey, I've been urged to step up the pace here. We've still got quite a bit of agenda to go through. And then, of course, as you know, there's a closed meeting to follow this meeting. So we'd better get on with it. It's the next item on our agenda is the verbal report from our CAO, Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. I only have just a few things. I have actually 3 things I'd like to do. Firstly, I'd like to have Mr. Ray just walk you through really high level the great progress that has been made with respect to the improved governance and policy changes within the TNRD. So Mr. Ray, if you could just give that really quick verbal update, and then I will follow up with just 2 other quick updates for the board, and we'll be on our way.
Yeah, thank you, and through the chair. So this is going to sound familiar to the people at the policy committee meeting yesterday because they received this update already. But for the rest of you, so there's been, and I'll run through it fairly high level. Work done on policy and training that's been ongoing. Recently, we've got some ethics training that senior management's undertaking. There's a free training module we can take advantage of through the LGLA that we're conducting this month. And then work's being done on the code of conduct and conflict of interest policies. We currently have a ethical business conduct policy.
Excuse me, Mr. Ray. Director Quinn, could you turn your mic off, please? And Director Ray, too. Okay, thank you.
That's okay. So we're separating those into 2 separate policies, which seems to be sort of best practice amongst other local governments, and it'll help us deal with those in a more focused way as separate issues. Legal and conflict of interest training going along with that. And with the upcoming election this fall, Mr. Hildebrand has already started making plans for the board orientation and training that will happen with the new board, which will include the legal conflict of interest and governance training. There's some fraud awareness training planned that's coming up. The audit committee specific training, we're looking at that with best practices. Revised audit committee charter is being worked on. Ms. Campbell is working on an overall review of committees and the committee structure in terms of reference, and certainly that was one of the things highlighted in the recommendations, was to take a closer look at the audit committee. Providing the board with monthly accounts payable reports. You've seen a couple of reports come to you already with just some of the reporting on the check register, frankly, the payments for January and February, and that's going to continue on a monthly basis, as well as quarterly reports that will help provide you with information on the board's spending and senior management spending. Website updates to go along with that for greater public awareness and transparency. The financial statement audit normally would have come to this meeting. We would have had our auditors come and present the audited financial statements. It's taking a little bit longer this year, so the TNRD audited financial statement should be coming to the meeting in April. And this summer will be due for another request for proposal for audit services for next year. So we're beginning to work on that. We're working on overall structure for skills development, mentoring and coaching for managers, and bringing up some of that skill level. And as we make the policy development, we're looking at a bit of a roadshow fashion of rolling out training to update all the staff on what those policy changes are and what the new expectations are. It'll be department specific in many cases. We're looking at vacation management enforcement, make sure people are using up their vacation, which was part of the recommendations, along with 360-degree performance reviews, starting with the CAO every 2 years and senior management to follow every 3 years. We've begun doing employee exit interviews that's being led by the general manager of human resources. As I said, Ms. Campbell's been doing more comprehensive review of board committees, making sure we update and modernize the committee composition and processes, and make sure that the needs and expectations of the board and the services we provide are properly being met. For example, looking at the audit committee and turning it into an audit and finance committee. EOC compensation is being looked at. We've been looking at what our historical practice has been compared to what the province does with its own staff, and what's in the collective agreements, which may be different. And overall, looking at the board remuneration and travel, where right now it's all sort of in the remuneration bylaw, and looking around at sort of best practices, it looks like it might be a smarter idea to leave the remuneration in the bylaw and have that refer to a policy for the expenses, because the expenses also reflect on the expense rates that the staff get to have applied to them. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. So staff has been working very hard on policies and procedures, and I know the policy committee is also being tasked with a lot of review and information as well. So that'll be coming to the board in the near future. I have just two other quick updates. The TNRD has recently created an election page on our website that provides some great information about the upcoming election, and would encourage you to take a look. We will continue to add content as the year progresses, which will allow us to be kind of a one-stop shop for all TNRD election information. And then my final comment was the 14 CAOs within the TNRD connect and communicate on a regular basis on a number of topics, and we also meet a few times a year as well. One of the topics that was recently discussed, and Mr. Ray mentioned it, is a training session that would be for our newly elected boards and councils from all over the region for some consistency. The TNRD and the City of Kamloops have been working together to provide this session, and it'll be held on Friday, November 4th. So I just wanted to encourage all the directors to ensure that that date's in your calendars or in your minds. We've received some very good feedback and some positive comments from the CAOs, and that we'll all be participating in that to have a kind of a seamless transition for some of the core governance functions of all of our regional districts and councils. So thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I had for now.
Thanks, Mr. Hildebrand. Are there any questions? Seeing none, that takes us to item 8.1.2, the Monte Creek assent vote question and alternate means of public notice. And there are two recommendations. Thank you. Moved, and is there a seconder?
Second.
Seconded by Vice Chair Roden. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Is anyone opposed? That's carried. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Indigenous Skills Employment and Training Program application for library high school summer student funding. There is a recommendation.
Second.
Any discussion? There's none. All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Takes us to 8.1.4 Canada Communications Community Building Fund. There is one recommendation. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. 8.15 contract award for the landfill water quality monitoring. There is a recommendation. Second. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see Mr. Vera is here. Is that consistent with what we paid for in the PUF?
Yes, it is in line with what we had budgeted and what we paid in the past.
Thank you for that.
Any further questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Contract award for the 911 call answering service. There is a recommendation. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? No discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? Carried. Canada Community Building Fund for electoral area P Rivers and the Peaks, the McClure Community Fire Hall renovation. There is one recommendation.
Move recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Rogers Telecommunications tower on Stagecoach Road Trail in Quilshana. There is a recommendation. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. We have a Caribou Regional District Official Community Plan referral with respect to the 83-mile subdivision. And there are a couple of recommendations there. I understand that Ms. Sadilkova is going to speak to this matter.
So this is a little unusual in that, of course, the final authority rests with the Caribou Regional District. But because we've drafted an official community plan together, so it covers both sides of Green Lake, we do refer things back and forth to each other. In this case, it's a rezoning and OCP amendment to enable a subdivision. Staff are recommending a different zone than what they've requested, and it would result in larger parcel area. Given the stated purpose is for a small holdings farm, we believe it is reasonable to go to the larger zone, the rural zone, the small holding zone, which I believe would require 2 hectare area parcels, whereas they propose 1 hectare area parcels. The existing parcel is large enough that it can accommodate that. Does that answer? Without reading the whole report, that's the summary.
Thanks very much. Were there any questions for Ms. Sadilkova? Director Watson?
So if we approve these recommendations, and then it goes to the Caribou Regional District, is that how that works?
Yes, absolutely. It's just a recommendation. Then that gets fed through their planning staff to their board, who make the final decision.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or is there any further discussion? With respect to recommendation 1. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? No hands up. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. That takes us to committees. Internal committees, Audit Committee, Director Rain.
Yeah, the audit committee didn't meet as the auditors weren't prepared yet. So we will be meeting shortly. No meeting.
Thank you. Economic Development, Director Roden.
No meeting, no report.
Electoral Area Directors, Director Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move the minutes of the March 10th meeting.
Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Emergency Management and Protective Services, Director Watson. Policy Review Committee, Director Sinclair.
Thank you, Chair. We met yesterday. Minutes and recommendations will follow, and our next meeting is May 18th.
Thank you. Regional Solid Waste Management, Director Schaefer is not here. Director, Vice Chair Director Rothenberger is not here. Is there any, there's not a report? Okay, thanks very much for that, Director Elliott. Thompson-Nicola Invasive Plant Management, Director Kershaw.
We did have a meeting and that should be coming to the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thompson Regional Hospital District Director Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next meeting is June the 16th. However, we're going to endeavor to try to get the board through a tour of the hospital prior to that.
Thank you. Utilities Systems Committee Director Elliott. Am I missing something here? Yeah, I'm missing a page, am I not? Okay, good, thanks. Thompson Headwaters Waters Committee Director Quinn. Thank you. Wells Gray Country Services Director Schaefer is not here. Anybody know if there was any meeting there? We'll assume there wasn't. Joint Services Committee Director Schaefer and Director Blackwell. Director Blackwell?
I can't remember a thing right now. I just got my power back on about an hour ago. So I'll get back to you at the next one, or Director Schaefer will. I don't think she's got her power back on yet.
Thank you. Committee of the Whole. Director Kershaw, I'll let you speak to that.
Just like move the minutes of the February 25th, 2022 minutes meeting.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Takes us to external committees. Fraser Basin Council Director Rice. You have minutes?
Yeah, no minutes. Move the minutes of the March 8th, 2022 meeting.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Municipal Finance Authority Director Brown, you're the alternate. Director O'Reilly's not here.
Director O'Reilly is currently in municipal finance meeting. He'll report when he gets back.
That explains why he's not here.
Yeah.
Municipal Insurance Association Director Duty.
No meeting, no report.
Municipal Watershed or Shuswap Watershed Council Director Crow.
No meeting, no report.
Kamloops Airport Authority Director Roden.
I gave verbal notes at the last meeting. The next one is in June.
Thank you. Federation of Canadian Municipalities Director Singh.
No meeting, no report, Chair Gillis.
Thank you. Community Energy Association Director Blackwell.
Yeah, move the meeting notes summary be received. Seconded by anybody?
Second.
Thank you. All those in, well, you, that's your thing.
Is there any discussion of that? I assume none. All in favor?
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Mayor Blackwell.
Yeah, it's a little hard when you're running the meetings. Anyways, if anybody's interested, next Wednesday there is a webinar on the same topics, which is living with electric vehicles and electrification of for Northern BC. If you're interested, send me an email. I will send you the webinar link. And Joint Services Committee next meeting is April 11th, so that clears that up.
Thank you for that. Correspondence, we have action requested. The Skitcheson Indian Band wishes a letter of support. Any discussion? None, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Information only, a letter from Michelle James, another from the city of Abbotsford. Any discussion? None? So Director Sinclair, sorry.
Thank you. The letter says it's for information only, but a number of questions have been brought up in the letter. Is somebody going to be getting back to the writer?
Ms. Satt?
This letter has been referred to staff and they followed up on it. Thank you.
Thank you. So moved and seconded that they be received for information. All in favor? Any opposed? Director Singh.
Sure, Gillis, I just wanted to say that the meeting, the letter from the Abbotsford Council refers to the UBCM Emergency Practices Committee with the province, the update committee, and we're having a meeting next week. So I imagine also will be raised there. So I think it's, yeah, because it's all across the province, people are well aware of the concerns raised, and we'll try and talk about also the province to that venue.
Thank you. So I think I called it. Is there any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Maybe we've done that twice, I'm not sure. New business from directors. Directors Watson and Quinn. Director Watson, you're first.
Thank you. With COVID restrictions being slightly lifted and all of us trying to get back to normal life, I'm wondering if it's time for this board to consider some community-to-community forums with our First Nation neighbors, and would like to move that we work on this kind of not so much as all the TNRD, but let's say the western portion, to do a C2C forum. And I wonder if I can get a seconder for that.
I'd second that.
Let's move and seconded. Is there any discussion? Director Blackwell.
Yeah, I recently sat in, and I think maybe a couple other people here did as well, on a really good set of speakers for an interior health Indigenous conference, basically the kind of things that we need to learn. And I think if we could either get, it was Harley Eagle, and I can't remember the woman's name. I do have the flyer saved. I will forward that to staff because I think they would be excellent people to do some training with.
Thanks for that. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? See no one opposed, that's carried. Director Watson. Director Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a board update on the Little House Warriors and the river. You saw the letter I wrote, the reply from the province, and to date, as promised, there was no, they promised communication. I'm still waiting. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Roden.
Thank you. Directors with long memories will remember that in late fall of 2019, we had a delegation from the Community Resource Society in Ashcroft asking for funding for their Christmas hampers. The presenter was Esther Lang, and at 1 o'clock this afternoon, Esther was one of 31 people and one group around BC that got the Medal of Good Citizenship. And if I may, just one little story about Esther. I like to say I used my keen investigative journalism skills to deduce who it was, because I got an invitation and was not told who it was. But she was the first name that came to my mind. Who in Ashcroft would get the Medal of Good Citizenship? So I phoned her and asked her a series of roundabout questions, and eventually found that yes, it was her. When I phoned my son, who just missed having her as a teacher at Ashcroft Elementary, she retired the year he was due to come into her class, and they were not connected. Just going to get that out there. I phoned my son and I said, in Ashcroft, who do you think would get the Medal of Good Citizenship? And the words were still hanging in the air. And he said, Esther Lang. So that is how much of a mark she has made on our community, and not just Ashcroft, Cache Creek, Clinton, Spence's Bridge, Wallachine. The entire area would be a much worse place without Esther Lang. So I just wanted to recognize her to the entire TNRD. She is only the second person in our region to get the Medal of Good Citizenship. The first was Clayton Cassidy, the Cache Creek Fire Chief, in 2016.
Thank you, Director Roden. Yes. Director Quinn.
Through the chair to Director Roden,
Sorry.
a letter of congratulations from the board be in order.
I'm sure a letter of congratulations would be very much appreciated. She's very
So moved.
modest, so it's not it wouldn't be a public thing. She'd like that.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Is any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? I can't imagine anyone's opposed. That's carried. Director Stamer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if the board would support a motion to send a letter to BC Wildfire Service. Just because, you know, our fire season's right around the corner. We haven't really heard from them. They haven't given us any presentations in regards to improvements in their level of services and the efficiencies in their operations. And also, if they've acted upon any of the suggestions that we had at our fall meeting, including a quicker payment schedule for firefighters and equipment this season. I mean, it has a significant impact, not only to the contractors and the harvesting contractors throughout our region that are supplying the majority of the equipment and the workers for the fire lines and such, but also it has an impact to our volunteer fire departments as well, because when we send those fine people out onto the fire lines and in support like they did in Westwold and Monty Lake, it took a substantial amount of time for us to get our money back. And the municipalities and the TNRD had to put a lot of money up front and waited months and months to get their money. So I think that we should have a meeting with BC Wildfire Service as soon as we possibly can, possibly at our next board meeting, so they can bring us up to speed on what's going on.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I see Mr. Hildebrand.
Thank you, Chair Gillis. We've actually reached out to BC Wildfire to ask them to be a delegation at the board, and they have not responded yet.
Director Brown.
I want to add too, not just the workers that are on the ground, but also our hotels and our restaurant owners that also wait months and months and months. We've had one contractor or one restaurant in Merritt who was serving the fire community, and by the time we got to the floods, he still had not been paid for the fire emergency, and he was holding a big mortgage to try to compensate.
Thank you. I'm sort of at a loss to know what to do here, Mr. Hildebrand. I understand what you're telling us, that we've already tried this. Should we treat Mr. or Director Stamer's request as a request for a follow-up?
Sure, that would be great.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. I think that finishes new business for directors. I see no more hands up. So that takes us to question period, and I believe we actually have a guest here who wishes to ask a question or two. Would you come forward, please? We'll set you up with a microphone and first identify yourself, please, and to the board.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Gillis. My question is regarding the presentation from the CFO. And it's regarding how much money has been allocated out of the 2021-2022 budget, or the budgets going forward due to the former expenses from the former CAO Gill. And then my second question is, what is the gross costs due to the former CAO, including legal expenses? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure I got the full gist of the first question, sir.
So the CFO presented some of those financial costs, and I'm just curious how much money is allocated out of the forecast from the 2021-2022 budgets, or any budgets going forward as expenses or legal or any of that. How much money has the taxpayers paid going forward, having to pay going forward? If that
Point
is-
of
Sorry,
order,
I understood.
Mr. Chair,
I understood that.
Point of order. We don't know who this man is. He can
Oh.
introduce himself.
My name is John Cantello. I'm a resident of Kamloops.
Okay, thank you. Now, I understood the second question was the gross cost of, I gather, the gross cost involved in the departure of our former CAO. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. Sir.
Okay, the first question is the one that I was asking you to clarify. I didn't get that.
Okay, so I'm just kind of curious, going forward, is the taxpayer paying any money, any legal bills, any other expenses going forward regarding this whole Gill mess? I could call it what
Yep.
you called it when we talked privately, but I don't think that would be appropriate.
Mr. Ray?
So the first part of your question was how much have we paid?
So that was the second question.
Okay, so the first part of the question is how much is in the budget for 2021 or 2022 related to it?
Or anything going forward.
Yeah.
Have we divvied that up year by year?
Yeah. And I don't have all those figures in front of me, so it would be difficult for me to answer in a comprehensive way.
Okay, but just an estimate.
Yeah, in 2022, there's nothing. Nothing specific. I mean, we have a budget for legal costs and things of that nature, but I've never been given anything specific to say we're setting aside this much for this issue. In 2021, we had the cost of the forensic audit, which was tangentially related, which was a little over $500,000. And there were legal costs involved as well, generally greater than our normal budget. I think I'd have to go back and look and see what the costs were. I know they were over what we would normally budget for that. In terms of any kind of severance or payout or anything, those were all in the 2020 year. I think those have been widely reported.
So what was the total cost? Just kind of ballpark? Like $1 million?
Well, I wouldn't-
I'd have to
Like
follow up to
1.5?
total everything.
I wouldn't want you, Mr. A, to be ballparking any any figures, and I think
That's my
that,
question. Thank you for apologizing for the whole affair and have a great day.
I think we should clarify, though, before we go any farther, that the forensic audit it was not called, nor did it deal solely with the departure of our former CAO. The forensic audit looked into all kinds of matters involving expenditures by staff and board members and so on of the TNRD. The scope was far beyond any costs associated with the departure of the CAO.
So as a resident of Kamloops, how much of that expenditure would have been due to city councilors or the mayor?
Sorry, city councilors, what?
How much of those expenditures would have had any involvement from the mayor or any of the city councilors?
I don't think,
I just-
I can't answer that question. I doubt
Okay.
if anybody else can.
Good. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ready? Okay. We have no other people wishing to participate in the question period. That takes us to our closed agenda. I think we'll have to have a few minutes to get the our system set up for the closed agenda.
So moved.
Moved, we go into closed session. All in favor? Carried.